I had just turned 22 when I first crossed paths with Michael. It was one of those Saturday mornings when you leave the house without any hurry, just to breathe a little, and destiny decides to appear out of nowhere. I was in the bookstore downtown, flipping through some books when I felt someone watching me. I looked up, and there he was, smiling in a way that made my stomach do a somersault. "Sorry to bother you, but didn't you drop this?" He held a bookmark that wasn't even mine, but I said yes anyway. Silly, right? But it was our first contact, our first innocent little lie that turned into a story to tell our friends. Michael had a way of making me feel special from the very first encounter. It wasn't just his appearance, although he was very handsome. It was the way he paid attention to every word I said, as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. After a few weeks of meeting for coffee, he invited me to dinner. I spent hours choosing an outfit, putting on lipstick, taking off, and putting on different earrings. Dinner was perfect. He took me to a small Italian restaurant, one of those with candles on the tables and soft music. We talked about everything and nothing at the same time. He told me he was an accountant, that he had recently graduated, that he lived alone in an apartment near his work. I talked about my pedagogy studies, my dream of having my own school one day, how much I loved reading old novels. "You have a sparkle in your eyes when you talk about the things you love," he said, playing with his wine. I felt my face warm up instantly. No one had ever noticed that about me before. The months that followed were like living in a romantic movie. Michael would show up at my house with flowers, take me for walks in the park, spend hours on the phone with me just to hear about my day. My mother adored him. My friends kept saying how lucky I was to have found a man like him. And I completely agreed. It was he who suggested that we move in together after a year of dating. "It makes sense, doesn't it?" he said one night while we were watching a movie on the couch at my house. We already spend so much time together anyway. My heart raced. It was what I most wanted to hear. We found a small but cozy apartment in the neighborhood we both liked. I remember staying up some nights, just watching him sleep beside me, thinking how lucky I was. We were one of those couples that people saw on the street and commented, "What love. What harmony." Michael was attentive in a way that made me swoon. He would come home with chocolate when I was sad, remember all my important appointments, help me with my school tasks. On Sundays, we made pancakes together, listening to loud music and laughing at any silly thing. "I think I want to spend the rest of my life like this," he told me one morning, kissing my forehead while I was still half asleep. I smiled, pulled him closer, and whispered, "Me too." It seemed like we had found our formula for happiness. After 2 years of living together, Michael surprised me with a marriage proposal in the same park where we used to walk. It wasn't anything too elaborate. He simply stopped in the middle of the walk, knelt down and said, "Will you marry me?" I didn't even let him finish the sentence properly. I was already screaming yes and jumping into his arms. The wedding took place in March 2015. It was exactly as I had always dreamed it would be. Simple, but full of love. My mother cried throughout the entire ceremony, my friends threw rose petals, and Michael couldn't stop smiling. During the vows, he said I was the most incredible woman he had ever met, and that he promised to make me happy every day of our lives. I believed every word. The honeymoon was in Gramado. We stayed in a small inn, ate fondue, took thousands of photos. I stored every moment in my memory, every laugh, every kiss, every "I love you" whispered in the dark. When we returned, I felt complete. I had found my place in the world, and it was by Michael's side. Married life started even sweeter than I had imagined. Michael continued to be the loving husband he had always been, surprising me with little things, a note on the fridge, my favorite coffee, a massage after a tough day at work. I graduated in pedagogy a few months after the wedding and got a job at a private school near home. Everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place. It was about a year later that Michael received an offer that would change everything, although I didn't know it at the time. His boss offered him a promotion. He would manage a new office that the company was opening. The salary was better, the responsibility greater, and best of all, it was only 15 minutes from home. "It's the opportunity I've been waiting for," he told me excitedly over dinner. "I'll have my own team, my own clients. It's an important step in my career." I was thrilled with him, happy to see him so excited. It never crossed my mind that this promotion would be the beginning of the end of everything. Michael took on the new position in January. At first, he came home talking about how challenging it was to set up the office structure, hire people, organize processes. He seemed fulfilled, and I felt proud of him. "My husband, the manager," I joked, and he laughed, pulling me into a hug. It was in March that he told me about the new hire. "I need an assistant," he said, fiddling with his notebook at the kitchen table. "Someone to help me with organization, answer the phone, that kind of thing. I found a candidate who seems good, a girl who just graduated in administration. Her name was Emma." Michael talked about her a few times during the first weeks, how she was adapting well, how organized she was, how she had interesting ideas to improve some processes. I listened without paying much attention. It was normal for him to talk about work. He had always done that. But after a while, I noticed that the name Emma came up too often in conversations. Emma suggested this. Emma organized that. Emma had a brilliant idea today. At first I found it funny, then it started to bother me a little, but I pushed those thoughts away. I was being silly, jealous, without reason. The changes in Michael's behavior were subtle at first. He was still affectionate, but there was something different. He spent more time on his phone, brought work home more often, arrived a little later some nights. When I asked about his day, his answers became vaguer, less detailed. One night, while we were watching television, his phone beeped with a message. He looked quickly and put the device in his pocket. "Who was it?" I asked casually. "Oh, work," he replied, but he didn't look me in the eyes. It was the first time I felt a strange pang in my stomach. I started paying more attention to the little things. Michael had always been careful with his appearance, but I noticed he was dressing up even more for work. He wore different perfumes, shirts I didn't know, cut his hair more often. When I commented on the new shirt, he said Emma had suggested that the color suited him. "Emma said that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "How did she suggest it?" Michael turned a little red and replied that it was just a comment during lunch, that she had complimented the color of the shirt he was wearing the day before. I nodded, but that information kept hammering in my mind. The business trip started around that time. Michael explained to me that as a manager, he needed to visit clients in other cities, attend important meetings. It was natural, it was part of his new position. What made me uncomfortable was knowing that Emma always accompanied him on these trips. "Why does she need to go along?" I asked one night when he was packing for another 2-day trip. "She's my assistant," he replied, as if it were obvious. "I need someone to take notes, organize the schedule, take care of the details. It's work, love." I wanted to believe it was just work. I tried to push away the bad thoughts that started to appear in my mind. Michael was my husband, he loved me, he would never give me a reason to doubt. But there was something in the air, a bad feeling that I couldn't explain. It was as if a shadow had settled over our marriage and I didn't know how to make it go away. The bad feeling that had been with me for weeks exploded on a Wednesday in June. I was at home, preparing dinner. I was going to make lasagna, Michael's favorite dish, when I felt such strong anguish that I had to stop what I was doing and sit down. My heart raced, my hands began to tremble, and a voice in my head screamed that something was wrong. I tried to calm down, take a deep breath, continue chopping the tomatoes for the sauce, but the feeling only got worse. It was as if someone was squeezing my chest from the inside, slowly suffocating me. Suddenly an image appeared in my mind, Michael in the office with Emma. It wasn't a normal image of work, it was something more intimate, closer. I dropped the knife on the sink and grabbed the car keys. I didn't even think about what I was doing, I just knew I needed to go to Michael's office at that moment. The 15-minute drive seemed like an eternity. My stomach churned, my head throbbed, and I couldn't stop imagining horrible scenarios. The building where the office was located was small, only 3 floors. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling as heavy as if it were made of lead. On the 2nd floor, I could see the glass door of the office. There was light on, the curtains were closed. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The scene I saw destroyed my world in a second. Michael was kissing Emma, his hands on her face, both of them embraced near the desk. They separated when they heard the door open, and the expression of panic on their faces confirmed everything I already knew in my heart. Emma ran away, literally. She grabbed her bag, passed by me without looking me in the eyes, and went down the stairs, almost tripping. I stood there, looking at Michael, waiting for him to say something, anything that could explain what I had just seen. "It's not what you're thinking," were his first words. How cliché, right? I almost laughed, but I was too busy trying to process the reality. My husband, the man who promised to love me forever just 2 years ago, was cheating on me with his assistant. "It's not what I'm thinking," I repeated, my voice coming out higher than normal. "And what am I thinking, Michael?" He turned red, stuttered some meaningless words, tried to approach me. I took a step back. I didn't want him to touch me. I drove home on autopilot. I don't remember thinking about anything specific during the drive. My mind was blank, as if it had shut down to protect itself. It was only when I sat on the living room couch that reality hit me like a runaway train. My marriage was over. The man I loved, the man I trusted completely, had betrayed me in the most cliché way possible. Michael came home an hour later. I was in the same place, still wearing the kitchen apron, still smelling of onion on my hands. He sat beside me, tried to hug me, started with the classic script of the unfaithful husband. He was confused, didn't know how it happened, loved me more than anything, was going to end everything with Emma. It would never happen again. "How long?" was the only thing I could ask. He took a while to answer. 2 months, he whispered. 2 months, 8 weeks, 60 days of lies, of kisses on my face after kissing another, of false "I love yous," of pretending to be happy by my side. The physical pain I felt at that moment was worse than anything I had ever experienced. I couldn't stay in the same house as him that night. I grabbed some clothes, threw them in a suitcase, and went to my mother's house. She didn't ask questions when she saw me at the door. Crying, she just hugged me and took me inside. I spent the night awake, looking at the ceiling of my teenage bedroom, trying to understand how my life had turned upside down in a matter of hours. Michael called about 20 times the next day. He sent messages, showed up at the school where I worked, tried to talk to my mother. I didn't want to hear it. There was nothing he could say that would change what had happened. The trust had been broken, and I knew I would never be able to glue it back together. The separation process was more complicated than I imagined. We had joint accounts, loans, plans for the future that turned to dust. Michael tried to be gentlemanly in the division of assets, but I found out that he had spent a considerable amount of our money on dinners and gifts for Emma. There was even a beach trip he said was a work seminar, but which was actually a romantic weekend with her. The pain of betrayal was different from anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just sadness. It was a mix of anger, humiliation, disappointment, and emptiness. I felt stupid for not having noticed earlier, for having believed all the lies, for having been so naive. At the same time, I felt a painful longing for the life I thought I had, for the marriage I believed was real. The following months were the hardest of my life. I couldn't sleep properly, had no appetite, cried for any reason. I lost weight quickly. In 2 months, I had lost 18 pounds. My mother was always worried, trying to make me eat, convincing me to leave the house. But I just wanted to stay in my room, under the covers, pretending that the outside world didn't exist. Work became my refuge and my torture at the same time. On the one hand, it was the only place where I could concentrate on something other than my pain. On the other hand, seeing the couples of parents of my students constantly reminded me of what I had lost. Every time someone asked about Michael, I felt a lump in my throat and quickly changed the subject. The financial accounts were another nightmare. Michael had left me with several debts, including the car loan that he used but was in my name, and a loan we took together to renovate the apartment. My teacher's salary barely covered my basic needs, let alone all these debts. I had to ask my mother for help, who did everything possible to support me. I stopped going out with my friends. Every time they invited me to something, I made up an excuse. I couldn't stand hearing about their relationships, how happy they were, their plans for marriage or children. I felt like I was behind in life, as if everyone had discovered the secret to happiness except me. The church I had attended since childhood also became a difficult place. People asked questions about Michael, wanted to know why he wasn't showing up anymore. Some already knew about the separation and looked at me with that pitiful expression that made me furious. I preferred to stop going to avoid the embarrassment. It was around that time that Rachel, a college friend who had moved to another city, returned to visit her family. She called me wanting to meet up, and I almost made up an excuse not to go. But something made me accept the invitation. Maybe it was the longing for the time when I was happy without even knowing it. Rachel noticed right away that something was wrong with me. I was thinner, with dark circles under my eyes, clearly worn out. When I told her what had happened, she listened without judging, without giving unsolicited advice, just offering support. At the end of the conversation, she made a suggestion that changed everything. "Come with me to the church I attend when I'm here," she said. "It's different from the one you're used to, but the pastor is incredible. He has a special way of talking about hope." Initially, I refused. I wasn't in the mood to meet new places, new people, but Rachel insisted, and I ended up giving in, more to not disappoint her than out of my own will. The church was small, welcoming, with a more informal atmosphere than I was used to. Pastor David was a man in his 40s with a genuine smile and a presence that transmitted peace. After the service, Rachel introduced me to him, briefly told him what I was going through. "If you need to talk, I'll be here," he said simply. He wasn't pushy, didn't try to evangelize or give instant advice. He just offered an opportunity, and that touched me in a way I didn't expect. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. I returned to the church the following week and the week after that. Pastor David always greeted me, always asked how I was, but without pressure. It was he who approached me when he saw me crying after a particularly touching service about forgiveness. "Do you want to talk?" he asked, and I said yes. We began to have regular conversations. He explained to me that in addition to being a pastor, he was a psychologist, which made me more comfortable to open up. In the first sessions, I just cried and talked about the anger I felt towards Michael, about how I felt deceived and humiliated. Pastor David listened to me with patience, asking questions that helped me understand my feelings better. "The pain you are feeling is real and valid," he told me one afternoon, "but you can't let it define who you are. You are much more than what happened to you." They were simple words, but they began to plant a seed of hope in my heart. Little by little, Pastor David began to challenge me to think about the future, not just the past. "You are 25 years old," he said in one of our conversations. "You have a whole life ahead of you. What do you want to do with it?" I didn't know how to answer. It had been so long since I only thought about pain that I had forgotten how to think about possibilities. The turning point in my life began with small things. Pastor David convinced me to return to activities that I enjoyed before everything fell apart. I started slowly. I started reading books again, something I had completely abandoned. The first one was a light romance, nothing too deep, but it distracted me for a few hours. It was the first time in months that my mind was focused on something other than my pain. Then came other activities. I signed up for a gym near my house, more to get out of my room than out of a desire to work out. At first, I only stayed 20 minutes on the treadmill, but it was progress. Little by little, I began to enjoy the feeling of physical exhaustion, as if I were expelling all the sadness through sweat. The conversations with Pastor David continued to be fundamental. He helped me understand that Michael's betrayal said more about him than about me. "You weren't betrayed because you weren't good enough," he repeated whenever I started to blame myself. "You were betrayed because he made a bad choice. The responsibility is his, not yours." Slowly, I began to rebuild my self-esteem. I bought new clothes, started taking care of myself again, wearing makeup when I went out. It wasn't to impress anyone. It was to feel good about myself. Rachel, who had extended her visit to support me, celebrated every small victory with me. It was through Rachel that I met the support group for people who had gone through similar situations. At first, I resisted the idea. I didn't want to listen to other people's sad stories. But when I finally went, I discovered that it was exactly the opposite. Seeing other people who had gone through betrayals and managed to rebuild their lives gave me hope. A year after the separation, I was in a much better situation. There were still difficult days, but they were the exception, not the rule. I had managed to renegotiate the debts, was earning a little more at school with extra classes, and most importantly, I was learning to be happy alone. It was around that time that the school where I worked underwent a restructuring. Several teachers were transferred to other units in the network. I was assigned to a new, larger school in another neighborhood. It was a change, but I saw it as an opportunity to truly start over. At the new school, I met William. He was the pedagogical coordinator, a few years older than me, divorced, and the father of a little girl. Our first encounter was terrible. He was stressed with administrative problems. I was nervous about the first day at the new job. We argued about the organization of the classes and ended the day avoiding each other. But work forced us to coexist, and little by little, we discovered that our first impression had been mistaken. William was intelligent, dedicated, had a dry sense of humor that made me laugh. He, in turn, said later that he thought I was too proper at first, but that he began to see my determination and passion for teaching. The friendship grew naturally. We had lunch together in the school cafeteria, shared teaching materials, exchanged ideas about teaching methods. He told me about his divorce. He had also been betrayed, had also gone through a difficult period. This created a connection between us, a mutual understanding. The relationship began almost without us noticing. One day, he invited me for coffee after work to discuss a project, and we ended up talking about our lives, our dreams, our fears. When we realized it, it was almost 10 o'clock at night, and we hadn't talked about work at all. William was different from Michael in every way. Where Michael was impulsive, William was thoughtful. Where Michael made grand romantic gestures, William showed affection in small things. He remembered that I didn't like strong coffee, brought me books he knew I would like, listened to my school stories with genuine interest. Our relationship evolved slowly, respecting my healing time. William never rushed, never demanded more than I was ready to give. When we finally kissed, 6 months after the first coffee, it was as if all the pieces of my life fell into the right place. We got married in October 2018 in a small ceremony only with close family and dear friends. Pastor David officiated the ceremony, and I felt that I was closing one cycle and starting another. This time, there was no rush, no anxiety. There was only the certainty that I was making the right choice. William and I had our daughter Sophie 2 years later. Holding her in my arms for the first time was one of the most intense experiences of my life. I looked at William, saw the love in his eyes, and understood that all the pain I went through had been worth it. It had brought me to that moment, to that family, to this happiness that I didn't even know was possible. Today, when I look back, I can see how much I have grown. Michael's betrayal was not the end of my story. It was just a difficult chapter that taught me about my inner strength. I learned that I can survive the most intense pain, that I can rebuild myself as many times as necessary, that I deserve true and loyal love. Sometimes I still think about Michael, but without anger. He made his choices and had to live with the consequences. I heard that he married Emma, but it didn't last long. I don't feel satisfaction about this, I just feel indifference. That part of my life is over, filed away, turned into experience and wisdom. My life today is good in a different way than I imagined at 22. It's a more mature happiness built on a solid foundation of self-knowledge and self-love. William and I are true companions. Sophie is growing up surrounded by love, and I finally understand what it means to be complete. The pain passes, life goes on, and sometimes when you least expect it, it surprises you with moments of joy so pure that they make all the suffering worthwhile.